A businessman, he's wearing a suit, he's wearing a tie, he's got a large bank account, a beautiful wife, 2 fine children that go to Ivy League schools one day. He comes up to me, he says, "What is the goal of Zen practice?" Surprisingly enough, this man was a Zen practitioner, and he said, "I have been sitting for a long period of time, and I've been asking myself lately, why am I doing this? And how do I know if I'm doing it right?" So how do you know if your practice is really working? That your investment in time and effort and credulity and life energy is worth it? So we're not going to exit this video without offering a goal for Zen practice. The goal, if you will, the aim. Aim is probably a better word. The aim of Buddhism and Zen is what? I mean, we've talked about it a number of times on this channel. Check your notes. The aim is to end suffering. Is what you're doing towards the aim of ending suffering? Because ending suffering is the practice. And I know that can feel a little bit of like a letdown. Zen just wants to end suffering? Boring! But this aim of ending suffering, in my experience, is very deep. It's like the closet in Narnia. Do you ever read those books by C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? The aim to end suffering is like this boring closet that's sitting right there, and you're like, I don't want to go through that. It seems so mundane and average and normal, but it's the key. It's the key to entering a new dimension, a new spiritual dimension, if you will. I remember when I first started practicing, my mentor had a little Zen center. And I remember one time a new student came, and she was smart, she was older, she was canny, she was world wise, and she was talking to my mentor and asking him about Zen practice after sitting one day. And she said, "You've been practicing for like 15, 20 years. What would you say Zen practice has done for you?" And my mentor gave an answer that I never forgot. He thought about it, and he was like, "I don't know what Zen practice has really done for me, because I don't know what I would be like if I had never done it." At the time, I thought that was an extremely unsatisfying answer. I did not want to hear, "Well, I've done it for 20 years. I don't know, maybe I'd be no better if I hadn't done Zen practice at all." But as I've gotten a little bit older myself, I've come to realize the wisdom of his statement. When things are going right, you don't need to talk about it. When something is healed inside you, you don't need to bring it up anymore. When a wound heals, it disappears. When suffering is gone, truly gone, it doesn't leave a trace. A spiritual practice can help to set things right inside you. A spiritual practice can set things right inside you. To illustrate what I mean by this, I'm going to share kind of a personal story, which I don't like to necessarily get this personal, looking into my iPhone and then downloading this footage onto the flippin' internet, especially YouTube. But in any event, I think it'll be instructive for me to share this story, this journey or arc. Here we go. I had a girlfriend in high school for 2 out of the 4 years. I was always trying to break up with her, and somehow, like a boomerang, she always came back and was locked around my arm again. But eventually we did break up, and I went to college, and I met a girl there, and I fell in love, really fell in love with her, and we dated all 4 years of college. She was Catholic, and I was sort of nominally Catholic, but over the course of my college education, I pretty much became un-Catholic. I got de-Catholicinated in college. She stayed Catholic. So as I exited college, as we graduated, it became clear that this relationship was like not gonna work. We were heading in completely different directions. So like a year and a half after college, we had this really really painful breakup. It left me completely stranded in this desert of like intense, deep, existential loneliness. So I began dating. I was living in Los Angeles. Dating in Los Angeles is a nightmare. And I was internet dating. This was like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, right when internet dating started, and it was kind of a wild free-for-all, and I met some pretty interesting people. I remember I met one young woman who told me that she had started a magazine. And I was like, oh, that's great, I'm a writer. What kind of magazine is it? She said, well, it's a little bit weird. And I was like, well, hit me with it, girl. And she said, it's a magazine that's devoted to poop. I am not kidding. She said, it's devoted to the different kinds of poop that human beings have. So there's this kind and this kind and this kind and this kind. And she explained it to me, and she's staring at me deadpan. And I couldn't tell if she was serious or not. So I was like, I'd love to see this magazine. And she said, well, you're in luck because I've got a stack of copies out in my car. So we go out to her car, we go to her trunk, she opens her trunk is empty. She's like, oh my God, somebody stole all my poop magazines. This was my dating life in LA. You were probably better off with the Catholic, you're thinking. I dated a lot of different people, and after a while I began to suspect that the reason I was not finding a partner that I could connect with was not because everyone around me was so crazy. Was not that there was a problem with the women, that the problem was with me. I began to think, this is just who I am. I'm somebody who can't fundamentally connect with another person in an intimate, romantic partnership. It's just not me. I'm destined to be alone. So I spent 13 years at the monastery, and I was lucky to have a teacher who was very down to earth. Maybe it was how I took his teachings, or maybe it was how he presented them, but intimacy and surrender of boundaries and the wisdom that your own personal boundaries and indeed yourself is a kind of construct created by the mind, not a fundamental insurmountable fact. These teachings and then the Zazen practice and the koan practice that I did day after day after day began to really wear away at my loneliness, at my sense of being an isolated, separate self. It's a strange thing being a monk, especially a monk in the tradition that I was a full-time monk in. You spend so much time on the cushion just sitting there. And this is indeed an environment in which one is inclined to ask, is this working? Is it doing anything? And is it worth it? I still ask myself that question. I will say this. Something was happening on that cushion all those years. The boundary between self and other was being deconstructed, was being worn down, was being erased without me always knowing it or being aware of it. The practice was always to do my exhale and do my inhale, and do my exhale and do my inhale. And my mind was always producing a wall, if you will, that kind of stopped me from doing this activity. But then, because I knew how to sit, I knew that the practice was, give yourself again to that exhale and give yourself to the inhale. And what I was doing over time was training to come out of myself and into the world as generously and openly as I could, and then to open myself and let the world come into me as softly and sincerely as I could. And you did it over and over and over. It's hard to get out of your own way. But that's what the practice was teaching me. What does this have to do with love? Well, to make a long story short, I was involved with a nun and it got really intense, and we were also taking care of my teacher, so that after we had broken up, we still had to work together because my teacher was 100-some years old and needed our help. He couldn't even walk without assistance, so the two of us took care of him. But we were broken up, we didn't get along, we saw life completely differently, and it was intense. So after her, I had a 5-year stretch where I was not with a woman. Only once was I with a woman for 5 years. It was complete cold turkey, to be totally crude about it. And then one day, I was in my bedroom packing my underwear and my socks to go to a conference for like Buddhism and science or something cheesy like that in San Diego. And I remember picking up my socks and putting them in my suitcase and thinking, suddenly out of nowhere, this little eruption of insight came. Oh, I was just talking to myself. I can do my Zen practice and bring my attention back to the task at hand, which is packing my socks, but actually what I would like is to talk to someone else. I'd like to have someone in my life. I'd like to have an intimate partner in my life. And it was just bing! And that very weekend, I remember I was sitting in a conference hall. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. I was totally tired. And suddenly this person appeared in front of me, and she starts talking to me. Like literally she appears right in front of my face and she starts talking to me. And I look at this person and I'm like, I don't know what she's saying. I'm really tired, but she's kind of hot. And it turned out we had met in a different context. At the monastery, we had hosted a workshop. She had been there. And so she and I wound up getting into a little bit of a relationship. We stayed in that relationship for a few months on and off. That didn't really work out, but she's a wonderful person. And it was the beginning of my exodus from the no sex, no relationship desert. And it was the beginning of the end of this whole era and chapter, decades long, of my adult life where I felt like I couldn't really love. So to make a long story short, to cut ahead here, I met my current girlfriend 5.5 years ago. I moved to Vienna to be with her. I've been with her ever since. Last night, I reached into the dishwasher to grab something and I poked my thumb and it started bleeding. I washed the blood off, poked my thumb on a fork. I washed the blood off. I went to get a Band-Aid. And suddenly, I don't know why, it occurred to me that I loved my girlfriend. How do you know if your practice is working? In my case, it's working, or it worked, because something was able to shift through that practice that allowed me to be able to love. The fact that I was able to pass through whatever that block was, I think it's a byproduct of practice. And I'm not even totally sure about that. This brings us back to my mentor. I really understand the wisdom of his statement. Hey, I don't know what kind of a person I would have been like if I hadn't done all this practice. Maybe I would have been able to love anyways. Maybe something would have shifted and I would have been able to love anyways. I don't know. But the practice of meditation, of sitting in silence, of doing that complete giving in the exhale and the inhale, that's the context in which I understand my life. That's the context in which I understand any improvements in my life. And so it's the context in which I understand this shift from being a lonely dude to being somebody who loves his girlfriend. God, that makes me sound like such a trad boy. But there it is. The aim to end suffering is very deep and very subtle. And the fruits of the practice, if you start to talk about them, they can sound like really amazing, but in the, like I've just talked about here, but in the end, I think it's really just you set things right inside you, and the wounds diminish, the problems dissolve and fall away, and you can live your life more freely, more openly, and directly, without all your hang-ups and carrying all your baggage and stumbling around with all your handicaps. I think that's the point or the aim of practice. It helps to set things right inside you. Okay, friends, it's getting late. I need to go download this hour and a half of footage I've just shot. I hope you found something in here that was helpful. If you like this channel, you can support my work on Patreon, where I've got some essays up, some blogs, some videos, and a nice little community over there. People always leave really interesting comments and have interesting insights over on Patreon. So thank you for that. And if you want to join that community, I'm going to leave a link in the description below. Thank you and happy sitting.